Hi guys, so this video is exactly what the title suggests, and that is my 10 favourite non-fiction books. This list is by no means static. It will over time change. Books might leave, books might return, but for now, this moment in time, these are the top 10 non-fiction books I have read that I would recommend to you guys. I have a selection of philosophy, history, politics, graphic novels, even memoirs, and hopefully there will be something for everybody in this video. These are also in no particular order. I'm just going to talk about them as I've written them down. First up is the only graphic novel actually in this video. I am a big fan of the non-fiction graphic novel genre, but this is the one that, regardless of its format, I would still say is one of the best non-fiction books I've ever read, and that is Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi. You can buy this graphic novel either complete or in 2 volumes, and it follows the author's life. It's her memoir about growing up as a young Iranian woman and then moving overseas with her family and returning to Iran as an adult. It covers politics, religion, the history of Iran, but also family and growing up and being a young woman, and it is just a fantastic book. It is so wonderful. I think it's a great in to non-fiction if you're looking for one, and I also think it's a great in to graphic novels if you haven't read a lot of graphic novels. It is the graphic novel that people who don't like graphic novels enjoy. And if you'd like to hear about more non-fiction graphic novels, then I have a whole video on the topic, so I'll link it down below. The next book is also kind of a memoir and also a advice book. It's kind of the only advice book I would say is in this video that's not necessarily my cup of tea when it comes to non-fiction, but this one is special, and that is The Art of Asking by Amanda Palmer. Amanda Palmer is the lead singer of the Dresden Dolls, which are a sort of alternative rock band, so you may be familiar with her through that. This is, like I said, partly her memoir and about how she learnt to ask for things, to put herself out there, and to survive as a creative person wanting to work in a creative industry. Her art is a musical art, also a physical art, in that she spent a long period in her life as a human statue, and it is just the most uplifting, inspiring read. And if you listen to the audiobook, Amanda Palmer narrates herself and also plays little songs at the end of each chapter. Next up, we veer to the very political, and that is The Establishment by Owen Jones. Owen Jones is a British journalist, and he has a YouTube channel if you want to check it out, see if you like his stuff before picking up his book. But I read this book last year and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a very compelling and meaty read, yet it didn't feel inaccessible, and in every chapter it deals with a different example of the way in which people in power retain their power and benefit from the subjugation of the majority in a country, specifically the UK. And Owen Jones researches and covers and interviews people on various different specific instances in recent British history. He deals with politicians, he deals with the press, he deals with the police. Topics he covers include the phone hacking scandal, the expenses scandal, Thatcher's Britain, the Hillsborough disaster if I remember correctly. A lot of different things. And although this book was very difficult to read and made me quite angry at moments, it left on a very positive, forward-thinking note, in the sense that it really made you think about what needs to be done to make society a fairer, more equal place. Talking about difficult books to read though, the next book had me in tears on multiple occasions in public, and that is Everyday Sexism by Laura Bates. This book stemmed from the Everyday Sexism project, which Laura Bates started online, where people share their experiences of everyday sexism, from catcalling in the street to long-term sexual abuse to discrimination in the workplace. And in this book, Laura Bates compiles some of these, looks at reoccurring themes within these, and applies a sort of analysis to these testimonies, and then goes out and interviews people in different industries like female politicians, and looks at different sets of data, including those related to crimes and job opportunities and benefits and lots of different things. There's so much going on in this book, and like I said, it made me tear up, but it also really inspired and empowered me to be more vocal about these things and to whatever extent I can in my everyday life, not let them go unchallenged. Next book is one of my favourite ancient history books, and I found this really difficult to pick an ancient history book. So I read a lot of ancient history books, a lot of the time on very niche specific subjects, so that I don't know if they would necessarily appeal to a lot of people on my channel or would be that accessible to people that haven't already read a substantial amount on ancient history. But if you are looking for more ancient history book recommendations, even if you haven't read any before, I have a whole video on that, so I'll link it down below. But the one I wanted to pick out from that selection and mention to you guys again is one of my favourites, and that is Goddesses, Whores, Wives and Slaves by Sarah B. Pomeroy. At this point in my academic career, there is not an ancient history book out there that I consider to be perfect. That is just, I think, the critical nature that you develop in academia. But this book is pretty darn close. It is such a wonderful and insightful introduction to women in antiquity. It is an invaluable book to anybody studying in that area, but also if you just want to read a little bit about ancient history, it's such a great in. It's not terribly long, it's not inaccessible, yet it is genuine, well-researched, important scholarship that was an incredibly pivotal study when it was published and is still referenced continuously. From gender in antiquity though to a book on gender in the modern day and gender theory, I have to recommend Girls Will Be Girls by Amy O'Toole. I think this is my most recent favourite. This book was amazing. It is, like I said, all about gender, but it is an incredibly accessible book. Amy O'Toole does have a PhD in gender studies, so this book is by no means dumbed down, but it's a book for everybody and it's applicable to everybody's life. And it's a real mixture of slightly more academic discussions and tidbits and stories from Amy O'Toole's real life, which make it so incredibly relatable, accessible, and it really touched me as a book, and I found myself nodding along at so many moments, and in other moments just feeling like somebody had put into words so many feelings I had and didn't know how to express myself. It is really wonderful, and in particular it discusses the way in which gender constructs have a negative impact on everybody's life in the modern world. The next book I feel like you've probably heard me mention. It was one of the best books I read last year and I mention it any chance I can, and that is Freedom is a Constant Struggle by Angela Davis. This is such a short little book. It's a collection of essays and speeches and interviews with Angela Davis, all of which deal with political activism and how that is a continuous battle, and although victories need to be celebrated, there's always going to be something else around the corner, and that doesn't mean you should give up the fight for a better world. It is about how we learn from past victories and failures and apply that to current struggles, and learn from people in different countries and talk with one another and organise, and also draws our attention to some of the modern institutions that are contributing to the oppression of certain groups and that need to be fought against. And guys, it's just perfect and so short. I mean, why not give it a shot? It's also written from the perspective of an activist and not necessarily an academic, so it is so accessible. It's not one of those political books that's just about being read for the sake of being read. It's one of those books that is telling you to get out there and be active and go beyond these pages, and it's wonderful. The next book is Back to History, and this is actually a modern history book. One book that I did read a couple of years ago and just think was absolutely fantastic was The Honour Code: How Moral Revolutions Happen by Kwame Anthony Appiah. This book is split into 4 parts, and the first 3 all deal with different historical periods, but the author looks at each of these through the lens of honour codes in societies. So that's what he uses as his focus for the book, but through that you get to learn about really different cultures. 3 historical honour codes he dealt with were Chinese foot binding, duelling in Britain, and transatlantic slavery. And in the 4th chapter he deals with modern day honour killings of women. So it comes back to the modern day, in fact. But it was so fascinating to read about all of these different places and times from this perspective and learn about these places and times, because I didn't really know much about particularly dueling or Chinese foot binding, and my knowledge of transatlantic slavery was very surface level, and each chapter just felt like the perfect length. I felt like I learnt lots but never got bored, and then suddenly I was onto something new and interesting, and it was just a really interesting book and a really enjoyable reading experience. I really appreciated the structure. But I've saved the ancient stuff for last. I have two works of ancient non-fiction to talk to you about, one of which is Greek and one of which is Roman, which happened by pure chance. The first one I'm going to mention is actually one of my all-time favourite pieces of ancient literature, and it was originally written in Latin, which is a surprise because most of my favourites are Greek, and that is the period I study. Just an absolutely fantastic read is Lucretius's De Rerum Natura, or The Nature of Things, and this is a work of philosophy. It is written in verse, although you can get non-verse translations. It's a didactic poem teaching you all about Epicurean philosophy, which makes me feel like it's a little bit more apt given that Epicurean philosophy did begin with the Greeks. But Epicurean philosophy is just absolutely fascinating. They believed in a very early atomic theory that we were all made up of tiny little atoms, and through the nature of things, Lucretius looks at the entire world down to the smallest thing, to the universe itself, and in between that it gives you some really interesting insights into Roman life and certain thoughts surrounding everyday issues and what's the best way to live your life, but also the structure of the universe and how the atoms and void function. I mean, it's obviously not particularly accurate when it comes to the scientific stuff, but it's a fascinating read, and certain elements of Epicurean philosophy I am definitely on board with. I always remember loving that book, and I've read it 3 times now. It's just so fantastic. And my last favourite is slightly vaguer actually, but I do have a suggestion for somewhere to go for a specific book, and that is the court speeches of 4th century Athenian orators. I am obsessed with Athenian court speeches. Those are what I'm working on for my PhD thesis, and they are so fascinating. If it's not obvious, they are court speeches from legal battles that were fought in classical Athens during the democracy, from a variety of different orators or court speech writers who would have written these speeches either for themselves, or they would have been paid to write them for people going to court, and this was their profession. So these would be delivered to audiences of hundreds of Athenian men in the courts to fight their side of the case, and they are so fascinating. And one of the best places to start with Athenian court speeches is the collected works of Demosthenes, or the selected works of Demosthenes. I have a selected works of Demosthenes in an Oxford World Classics edition back at home in Edinburgh, and it's really fantastic. These court speeches cover things from adultery to homicide to inheritance disputes to political treason. They just give you the most fascinating insight into Athenian life and attitudes towards certain things, customs and law and history, and I love them, and I would really recommend the court speeches of Demosthenes. Perhaps a little bit of a niche one to finish off with, but I can do my top 10 favourite non-fiction books without mentioning the court speeches. I hope there was at least one book that sparked your interest in this video, however, and I hope you enjoyed it nevertheless. Until next time guys, happy reading, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye!